are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.
Damn, that shit was dope.
And welcome back to another Warrior Creed live stream. The show title is on your screens now. UK threatens to recognize Palestine as a state as Israeli intel chiefs demand Netanyahu to stop the war. The topic today, in summary, will cover the threats of unilateral recognition for a Palestinian state by UK and allies. That includes Canada, Malta, potentially Germany, adding to the list of countries such as Spain, Ireland, and Norway that have already unilaterally recognized Palestine. And we'll give you our analysis on that take while demonstrating, as we said, only a week after the October the 7th attacks, that Netanyahu has overplayed his hand. Now, these unilateral demands for recognition of, or threats, we should say, for recognition of a Palestinian state come amidst internal domestic turmoil for Netanyahu and his war policy. As again, during the course of this stream, we will show you video of eyewitness testimony by a wounded Israeli soldier who served at the Gaza border on October the 7th, who testifies in the Knesset. We will show you the video, who testifies that the IDF were given a stand down order on the night of October the 7th, instructing them not to man the border that night until 9 a.m. the next morning. Yes, you heard that correctly. Video testimony in the Israeli parliament by a wounded soldier who served on the Gaza border on the night of October the 7th, testifying that the IDF received a stand down order on the night of October the 7th, instructing them not to defend the Gaza border by patrolling it until 9 a.m. the next morning. Of course, once the attack began that night, they jumped out of their beds at dawn, as he testifies, to try and fight back Hamas. But the stand down order had already been given and they were not at the border in time. That testimony corroborates what we here at Radical Media via Warrior Creed and other platforms have been alleging from the 2023, the very month of the attacks, October the 7th attacks in 2023, that this was an attack, yes, by Hamas, funded, yes, by Iran, but facilitated and funded also by Netanyahu and the Likudnik Zionists for the purposes of providing a pretext for Netanyahu and his Likudnik faction to invade and annex Gaza. We're going to prove all that with receipts over the course of this stream, including with eyewitness testimonies, and we'll give you our analysis on why these unilateral declarations for a Palestinian state by Prime Minister Starmer and others globalists will fall short and remain gesture politics unless and until they occur within a recognized regional framework for peace. That regional framework already exists. The framework is called the Abraham Accords, and any moves, whether it be on behalf of the Palestinian people, on behalf of the Arabs and Muslims of the region, or on behalf of the Israelis, Arab or Jewish, any move on behalf of any of these parties will fall flat if it occurs outside of a negotiated settlement in the context of the Grand Regional Settlement for Peace, known as the Abraham Accords. So Starmer's declaration, as sympathetic as we are to the idea of creating a Palestinian state, will fall flat unless it comes in the context of a regional negotiated settlement. That is the topic for the stream today. There's a lot to cover, but let's begin with PM Starmer's announcement or threat that the UK will recognize a Palestinian state. You can see there from July the 29th, breaking it was back then, Prime Minister Sir Keir Starmer has announced the UK will recognize Palestine as a state by the United Nations meeting in September, unless Israel agrees to a ceasefire. And here is video of Keir Starmer threatening precisely that.
On the 7th of October 2023, Hamas perpetrated the worst massacre in Israel's history. Every day since then, the horror has continued. The hostages are still being held today. The Palestinian people have endured terrible suffering. Now, in Gaza, because of a catastrophic failure of aid, we see starving babies, children too weak to stand, images that will stay with us for a lifetime. The suffering must end. Yesterday, I discussed this with President Trump, and we're mounting a major effort to get humanitarian supplies back in by air, and UK aid has been airdropped into Gaza today, and crucially, by land. We need to see at least 500 trucks entering Gaza every day. But ultimately, the only way to bring this humanitarian crisis to an end is through a long-term settlement. So we are supporting the US, Egyptian and Qatari efforts to secure a vital ceasefire. That ceasefire must be sustainable, and it must lead to a wider peace plan, which we're developing with our international partners. This plan will deliver security and proper governance in Gaza and pave the way for negotiations on a two-state solution. Our goal remains a safe and secure Israel alongside a viable and sovereign Palestinian state. But right now, that goal is under pressure like never before. I've always said that we will recognize a Palestinian state as a contribution to a proper peace process at the moment of maximum impact for the two-state solution. With that solution now under threat, this is the moment to act. So today, as part of this process towards peace, I can confirm the UK will recognise the State of Palestine by the United Nations General Assembly in September, unless the Israeli government takes substantive steps to end the appalling situation in Gaza, agree to a ceasefire, and commit to a long-term sustainable peace, reviving the prospect of a two-state solution. And this includes allowing the UN to restart the supply of aid and making clear that there will be no annexations in the West Bank.
Now, to be fair to Starmer, the globalist Prime Minister of Britain, the unilateral threat of a unilateral recognition of the state in Palestine was simply, it appears by that speech, designed to focus minds to the real objective, which is, as we're stating, the regionally negotiated peace plan, which another name for are the Abraham Accords. So the threat of a unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state is not the solution. Perhaps the globalist Prime Minister of Britain, Keir Starmer, is aware of that. Perhaps this threat was designed to focus those who stand to gain from destroying the idea or hope in a two-state solution by threatening unilateral progress on a two-state solution regardless. Perhaps it was there designed to focus minds because some parties are interested in ending the notion of a two-state solution. Those parties being, of course, factions such as the Likud Zionists led by Netanyahu and the Iranian regime. Curiously, these two enemies, the Iranian regime led by the theocratic Shiite Islamist tyranny in Iran, that regime, curiously, as despised as it is by the Likudnik Zionist Israelis led by Netanyahu, happens to be on the very same page on the subject, on the twofold subject when it comes to Israel. Continue the fighting and hostilities and reject the two-state solution led by the Palestinian Authority and Fatah under Mahmoud Abbas. The Iranians and the Likudnik Zionists both agree in rejecting the two-state solution and continuing the war. It's curious, is it not? So one suspects that Starmer, though he may well know that the threat for a unilateral recognition of a Palestinian state doesn't come in the context of a regionally negotiated peace plan, the threat may well be intended to focus the minds of the warmongers that the international community, or what's left of it, will proceed regardless. So give him the benefit of the doubt in that one aspect. But it did indeed, while talking about credit where credit's due, set off a cascading effect with other states chiming in and suggesting they would do the same. UK ally Malta, as reported on your screens now via Al Arabiya English, said soon after that they would do the same. And you can see that there now, reading from Al Arabiya. Malta will declare recognition of a Palestinian state during the General Assembly of the United Nations in September, Prime Minister Robert Abela says. So soon after, Malta followed suit with the UK, and soon after that, Canada, under their new Prime Minister, followed suit as well. You can see this here. Breaking Canada, as we posted when it happened. Canada joins UK, France, and Malta in recognizing Palestine at the UN this September. Spain, Norway, Slovenia, and Ireland already recognizing Palestine last year. Most other nations already do. But suffice to say, Canada followed the Malta and the UK announcement. And we have the Canadian announcement here to play for you as well. Here is Canadian Prime Minister Carney on the same subject matter of Canada recognizing unilaterally the state of Palestine by September.
The level of human suffering in Gaza is intolerable. Canada has long been committed to a two-state solution. An independent, viable, and sovereign Palestinian state living side by side with the state of Israel in peace and security. For decades, it was hoped that this outcome would be achieved as part of a peace process built around a negotiated settlement between the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority. Regrettably, this approach is no longer tenable. For the reasons I cited earlier, Canada intends to recognize the state of Palestine at the 80th session of the United Nations General Assembly in September 2025. This intention is predicated on the Palestinian Authority's commitment to much-needed reforms, including commitments by the Palestinian Authority's President Abbas to fundamentally reform its governance, to hold general elections in 2026 in which Hamas can play no part, and to demilitarize the Palestinian state. Canada will increase its efforts in supporting strong democratic governance in Palestine and the contributions of its people to a more peaceful and hopeful future.
So there was Canada following Malta, following the UK and France, a cascading chain of events, multiple European, Western nations threatening to unilaterally recognize the state of Palestine by September at the UN meeting if Netanyahu doesn't immediately declare a ceasefire. As we said, last year, Spain, Norway, and Ireland already did this. You can see that on your screens now. Sky News today. Ireland, Norway, and Spain are announcing that we recognize the state of Palestine. Irish Prime Minister Simon Harris says this is a historic day for Palestine. This happened last year. We're going to play you that clip right now as well.
On these same steps with Prime Minister Sanchez of Spain, and we said that the point of recognizing the state of Palestine was coming closer. That point has now arrived. Today, Ireland, Norway, and Spain are announcing that we recognize the state of Palestine. Each of us will now undertake whatever national steps are necessary to give effect to that decision. In the lead up to today's announcement, I've spoken with a number of other leaders and counterparts, and I'm confident that further countries will join us in taking this important step in the coming weeks. This is an historic and important day for Ireland and for Palestine. On the 21st of January 1919, Ireland asked the world to recognise our right to be an independent state. Our message to the free nations of the world was a plea for international recognition of our independence, emphasising our distinct national identity, our historical struggle, and our right to self-determination and justice. Today, we use the same language to support the recognition of Palestine as a state. We do so because we believe in freedom and justice as the fundamental principles of international law, and because we believe that permanent peace can only be secured upon the basis of the free will of a free people.
Now, on that note, the post-World War One settlement for the national right to self-determination, as referenced there in Ireland's case, their own right to self-determination and sovereignty from the Brits, it's worth noting at this stage that the supporting the cause of any peoples for self-determination is in origin and in essence an anti-globalist cause. The right to self-determination ends up being a spanner in the wheels of the globalist agenda, because globalism requires national identities and cultures to evaporate away in the name of the one world government. And that is why, though of course there are downsides to nationalism, especially far-right, racist, extremist, jingoistic, ethnic-based extremism and agitation. However, nationalism in the patriotic or patriotism sense is in many ways an antidote to the globalist aim of creating a one world government, because for the cultures and identities of distinct peoples to be preserved and in fact celebrated as different is one of the surest ways to ensure the ongoing decentralization of globalist structures, because they, by recognizing self-determination, would have to pay deference to national cultures in any worldwide structure. And that ensures decentralization. Whereas if you erase national identities and cultures, you end up creating rootless societies which are easier to manipulate into a one world government. And by being identity-less, they end up becoming more and more subservient, not knowing who they are and therefore being unable to understand their place in the world. So this is as a side point, but it's worth mentioning here. That's why the right, supporting the right to self-determination for any nation is in essence, of course with exceptions, but is in essence an anti-globalist cause. It's not a left-wing cause, it's not a liberationist cause, though it could well be both of those things, but it's an anti-globalist cause, crucially. Now, with the Spain, Norway, and Ireland announcement from last year, of course, this month, the UK, Canada, Malta, and France join that cascading series of events of states threatening to, or doing so, unilaterally recognizing Palestine. And after that, what happened was Germany decided to flirt with the idea as well. And as the extremist Israeli minister here states, as reported by Disclosed TV, we'll just read it for you. New Israeli National Security Minister Itamar Ben-Gvir says, quote, Germany is returning to support Nazism. Right. After Germany's foreign minister met with Netanyahu today amid speculation that Berlin may recognize the state of Palestine. And then there, with his post there, the National Security Minister of Israel, Itamar Ben-Gvir, saying 80 years after the Holocaust and Germany is returning to support Nazism. What, for recognizing a Palestinian state? As we've written above there, no one believes you anymore, war criminal. I mean, what an absolutely preposterous thing to say, that to support the idea of a Palestinian state means you're a Nazi. I mean, by the way, none of that works anymore. No one gives a shit. No one cares what name you call them. When they know that they're in the right for supporting a moral cause, such as the right of the self-determination for the Palestinian and Israeli peoples, to call them any form of name, whether Zio-Nazi on the one hand or Nazi on the other hand, these phrases, both sides are using them, abuse in this way, absolutely preposterous. Ignore it. Do not take it seriously, and don't pay any attention to the people that throw around this kind of language. Netanyahu has realized that he's in a jam with all of this. And as you can see here, reported by Shadow of Ezra, Benjamin Netanyahu has reportedly authorized his government to move forward with the full takeover of Gaza. He claims he's battling centuries-old blood libels, dark accusations that Jews slaughter Christian children to drink their blood. Netanyahu says these age-old lies led to the Holocaust, and now he argues similar falsehoods are fueling claims that Israel is starving Palestinian children. In other words, Netanyahu's trying to make this existential because he's losing. And rather than lose, what he and his Likudnik Zionist allies would like to do is make this an existential crisis so that all Israelis end up fighting for their very survival, not just for themselves, but for the very survival of the Jewish people as an idea. Of course, that means a fight to the very bitter end. That's what Netanyahu is trying to convert this into. Here is a video of Netanyahu articulating what we've just read there and digging his heels in even further.
All the massacres against Jews were preceded by horrible vilifications. The lies that were leveled against the Jews spread around the globe. We were poisoning the wells. We were carriers of disease. We slaughtered Christian children in order to drink their blood. And this spread from country to country and created massacre after massacre, culminating in the worst massacre of them all, the Holocaust, in which 6 million innocent Jews were led to the slaughter. Today, the Jewish state is facing similar vilifications. They lie about us. They say that we are deliberately starving Palestinian children. That's a barefaced lie. Since the beginning of the war, we have let in almost 2 million tons of food. 2 million tons of food for Palestinian civilians, Palestinian children. That's been our policy. But in the last few months, this humanitarian aid has been interdicted by Hamas looting. They steal the food from their own people. But in the last few months, that food has not been reaching the Palestinian civilians because Hamas is stealing it. So we've decided to go around it. I've authorized the Israeli Air Force to airdrop humanitarian food and medical supplies to Palestinian civilians. We invited other countries to join these airdrops, and many have. We also designated safe corridors through which these trucks can travel without being looted by Hamas or endangered by combat activity. And we're talking now to our American friends about further steps to alleviate any possibility of hunger or the appearance of hunger. We're committed to doing this, just as we're committing to free Gaza from the tyranny of these terrorists. And many Gazans come to us and they say, help us be free. Help us be free of Hamas, of their terror, of their cruelty, of their tyranny. And that's what we will do.
There's Netanyahu there hinting at the reoccupation of Gaza. That's what we will do, free Gazans from the tyranny of Hamas. Any Israeli reoccupation of Gaza is doomed to fail, but we're going to go into break down some of this pretext being used by Netanyahu, the specter of Hamas in Gaza, as the pretext for the reoccupation of Gaza. We're going to go into some of that for you because the fundamental rule of thumb with anything ever said by Netanyahu and his Likudnik Zionist cabal is that the exact opposite of it is true. So take this example that Netanyahu is alleging that Hamas did all of this stuff on October the 7th, which is why he has to go in. Of course, Hamas did do that stuff on October the 7th. What he's not telling you is that Netanyahu and his Likudnik Zionist cabal were facilitating and funding Hamas to do all that stuff. And we're going to show you all the receipts from Israeli and British press in just a moment to substantiate that point. But so bad is Netanyahu's reputation by now in this regard that nobody any longer believes him, not least his own former intelligence chiefs. On your screens right now is a post by Haaretz.com, a left-wing Israeli newspaper, reading, in a rare joint appeal, former Mossad, Shin Bet, and IDF heads call for an immediate end to the Gaza war, warning it now serves, quote, messianic and extremist goals, end of quote, and is leading to the, quote, loss of Israel's security and its freedom, end of quote. Bloody hell. Did you guys catch that? Read that again. We've got the former heads of Mossad, Shin Bet, and the Israeli army saying that the ongoing war by Netanyahu in Gaza has become messianic and extremist and needs to end now. We're going to show you that one more time there by Haaretz, reporting in a rare joint appeal, former Mossad, Shin Bet, and IDF heads call for an immediate end to the Gaza war, warning it now serves, quote, messianic and extremist goals, end of quote, and is leading to the, quote, loss of Israel's security and its freedom. Here is the interview that Haaretz has reported. Headlined in Haaretz, a futile war. Former Israeli security chiefs warn current Gaza war has no strategy. All of these receipts will be in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch, which is the write-up to this Warrior Creed live stream, available via majidnawaz.substack.com. That's the Radical Media platform. And as always, we will publish all the links to all this evidence, and there's a lot more coming. Stay with us to corroborate the analysis that we are presenting here to you. But Netanyahu, despite his positioning and threats that he wishes to reoccupy and invade Gaza, is rapidly losing support, not just abroad, as we began this stream with, but also domestically, as we've just demonstrated. And further to that, again reported by Haaretz, we'll just read it for you on your screens now. World-renowned Israeli writer David Grossman said coming to the realization that Israel is committing genocide was extremely painful, but he now has a moral obligation to speak up. Things aren't looking too good for Netanyahu inside or outside Israel when it comes to his little war in Gaza, or should we say his ethnic cleansing and most plausibly genocide in Gaza. As we said, only a week after the October the 7th attacks, 20 days after, you can see it there, from 2023, Netanyahu is about to overplay his hand tonight. That was the night he reinvaded Gaza. That was our forecast back then. That's pretty much what's happened. He's overplayed his hand, and now half or most of the informed world is incredibly, incredibly upset with Israel right now in a manner that cannot be overstated. Israelis need to be very, very aware of this. Because, of course, there is a danger that they are speaking in echo chambers, speaking to each other, even those who oppose Netanyahu, in a small Israeli bubble that is replicated online, speaking to each other, preaching to the choir, self-radicalizing themselves in one camp only of this war that has many sides to it. It's not all about the suffering of the Israeli population. That's a bitter pill that our cousins on the Israeli side need to hear. Because this is what's happening around the world, and it's getting out of hand. Even President Trump, as reported by the Times of Israel, headline, Trump said to warn Jewish donor that MAGA world is starting to hate Israel. That's a quote. We're going to read to you from that Times of Israel article. Netanyahu has overplayed his hand. Have a listen to this from the Times of Israel. Reported on the 5th of August, 2025. US President Donald Trump recently warned a Jewish campaign donor that his MAGA base was beginning to turn on Israel, the Financial Times reports. My people are starting to hate Israel, Trump is quoted as having told the unnamed donor recently, citing a Mideast expert, also unnamed, with contacts inside the Trump administration. This is all from the Financial Times, reported by the Times of Israel. To continue reading, the report describes the donor as prominent. There are people in the White House who are watching this narrative develop in the right wing, in the MAGA world, that is very anti-Israel, very anti-Jewish. The expert is quoted as saying, the comments come as Israel's come under increasing criticism, including from Trump and other Republicans, due to images of hunger emerging from Gaza. On Monday, far-right rep, this is of course the Times of Israel using the word far-right Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene of Georgia, a MAGA stalwart who has promulgated anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and routinely calls for an end to foreign aid, called what is happening in Gaza a genocide. Clearly, Netanyahu is overplaying his hand and is losing even the MAGA base. And part of the reason why that is happening is represented in the political cartoon that we've used for today's stream, which is on your screens again right now. And it is that these images of starving children being asked to condemn Hamas, hence the political satire here. Obviously, guys, this is a cartoon. Don't take it literally. It's making a point. And the point it's making, by the way, is bloody valid. Think about the point it's making. The starving children with a microphone over them as they lay dying on the floor. But do you condemn Hamas? The reason that's there is, as you just saw Netanyahu do, it no longer washes to continuously use Hamas as a pretext for invading Gaza by specifically focusing on what happened on October the 7th. Not least because, as the rest of this stream is going to demonstrate, October the 7th attack by Hamas, and yes, it was by Hamas, was facilitated by Netanyahu and his Likudnik Zionist cabal and funded directly by them and deliberately allowed to happen. And we're going to show you eyewitness testimony from Israeli soldiers who served at the border on Gaza on the night of October the 7th, testifying as much. We're going to show you that in a moment. But the point being, therefore, that the idea that somehow the Israelis or the Likudniks can continue blaming Hamas for everything and not have an ounce or an atom's weight of introspection with regards to what their own responsibility is also here, has stopped working. Nobody any longer is interested in a one-sided narrative. People have woken up to the idea that their impressions are being manipulated, and that those who truly care for peace recognize that there is always more than one side to the story. Take, for example, the demand that has been largely responsible for the failure of any ceasefire negotiations to date. That demand that Hamas must immediately, without condition, release all Israeli hostages. It was met with a video of a appallingly starving-looking Israeli hostage released allegedly by Islamic Jihad. The video, of course, one must be very sympathetic to the human plight of that Israeli hostage, who clearly does look starving. In the video, he asked for a lifting of the aid blockade that Israel's currently imposing on Gaza. But again, you can't really put too much stock on what he's asking. He's a hostage under duress, fighting for his life, and one must have every sympathy for him. So take that demand, release all Israeli hostages without conditions, otherwise we won't negotiate a ceasefire with you. In itself, that demand is incredibly biased and one-sided for the following reasons that are on your screen right now. And what we've posted a response to somebody on that matter who said, still waiting on the hostages. We've said online, sure, you can do that, but all civilians have already been released. Those remaining are all Israeli soldiers and hence considered prisoners of war under international law. Slight caveat, that's not entirely accurate. There are foreign Israeli hostages currently being held, such as Nepalese and others. They're not all Israeli former IDF, but the point here to keep in mind is those who are, which is the overwhelming majority of those who are left, except for one or two exceptions, are former soldiers and therefore under Israeli law, under international law, are considered prisoners of war. But that's not the main point of our response to the hostages point. That's a side point. So don't get stuck on that, because of course there are, like such as the Nepalese Israeli hostage, there are those who aren't former IDF soldiers. Don't get stuck on that point. Here's the main point, which we've elaborated on underneath that. By the way, Palestinians are still awaiting the release of 300 child hostages held by Israel, among approximately 10,000 security prisoners. Oh, and FYI, before you say it, yes, Hamas are criminals, just like your Prime Minister Netanyahu, the psychopathic war criminal who funded Hamas while facilitating October the 7th in order to create a pretext to annex Gaza. Hamas commander Yahya Sinwar, who led October the 7th attacks, was an Israeli prisoner whose life Israel saved in jail by operating on him and then releasing him early into Gaza. That's all factually true. Israel then selectively assassinated every other Hamas leader in his way till Sinwar became leader for precisely this reason. This is why Israel took 7 hours to respond to the attacks on October the 7th at the border, while the CCTV footage from October the 7th Gaza border has gone missing. Everyone knows your game is up. So the actual substance of the point we're making there, put aside the point about the Israeli hostages being former IDF soldiers and therefore being treated as prisoners of war, put that aside. The substance of the point we're making there is twofold. First of all, any release of hostages, yes, release all the hostages, including the 300 child hostages that Israel holds, who are, by definition, hostages because they're children. Yes, release all hostages. Point number one. Point number two, the but Hamas Batistan line no longer works when understood in the context of the fact that Netanyahu funded and facilitated Hamas to do exactly this. So you cannot have your cake and eat it too. You cannot claim that those who do not agree with your negotiation demands, that everything is Hamas's fault, they must release the hostages, and anyone who disagrees is sympathizing with Hamas, therefore sympathizing with terrorism, while at the same time knowing that Netanyahu funded Hamas and therefore is a financer of terrorism. You can't have your cake and eat it. Either this story is more complicated, there's more to the story than simply one or the other side, and that it's a very complex picture, including the fact that Netanyahu and his Likudnik Zionist cabal funded and facilitated Hamas on October the 7th and told their own soldiers to stand down so that the attack could happen. Either it's that complex picture, or let's not get anywhere. Let's not negotiate on any account, including the Israeli hostages that are being held by Hamas, because there are, of course, 300 child hostages being held by Israel. And children cannot be prisoners. It's as simple as that. Now what we're going to do is spend the rest of this stream proving these outlandish, admittedly sounding allegations we've just made. First of all, that there are child hostages, Palestinians, held in Israeli jails, approximately 300 of them, who must be released. No conditions, just like the hostages held by Hamas must be released. No conditions. No buts. No what ifs. They are children. Release them. And here is receipt number one for that. As reported in this headline, why are so many Palestinian children in Israeli prisons? A report by Al Jazeera. 23 child prisoners were released, but more than 300 minors remain in Israeli custody, many of them without charges. And even if they were charged, they're children. We're going to read from that article dated 26th of Jan 2025. An estimated 10,000 Palestinian children. An estimated 10,000 Palestinian children have been held in Israeli military detention over the past 20 years, according to the NGO Save the Children. Reasons for the arrest of children range from stone throwing to participation in a gathering of merely 10 people without a permit on any issue that, quote, could be construed as political, end of quote. Under what law are children detained by Israel? Controversially, Palestinian prisoners are tried and sentenced in military rather than civil courts. International law permits Israel to use military courts in the territory that it occupies. A dual legal system exists in Palestine, under which Israeli settlers living in the occupied West Bank and East Jerusalem are subject to Israeli civil law, while Palestinians are subject to Israeli military law in courts run by Israeli soldiers and officers. This means that a large number of Palestinians are imprisoned without basic due process. And here is an image that is on your screens now that tells you the figures of Palestinians in Israeli custody, with there at the middle left of the image, 320 children. We will publish all of these receipts tomorrow for you, but it doesn't stop there. The idea that somehow only Hamas are the bad guys and that Israel stands beyond reproach and that there is no equivalence between Hamas and the Likudnik Zionists led by Netanyahu is an idea that must now fall flat on his face because of the way, in particular, under Netanyahu, the occupying Israeli troops are treating children by allegedly, and we're going to show you eyewitness testimony now, murdering them in cold blood by shooting at them with snipers as they queue for food. Sky News reports by Yalda Hakim, quoting Dr. Nick Maynard, a surgeon who spent time in Gaza treating wounded children and teenagers. He said, "It seemed to us that this was like a game of target practice. We're going to shoot the head today. Tomorrow it will be the chest. The next day it will be the testicles." Dr. Nick Maynard, a British surgeon, is alleging openly on Sky News to Yalda Hakim that he's an eyewitness and that he operated on children that had been shot while standing in food lines, shot by the Israelis in their heads, chests and testicles in a manner that indicated a pattern, a deliberate pattern of events that would suggest that they were playing target practice with the children. Have a listen to this clip from Sky News.
NASA, for example, is one of the last remaining. We just want to show our viewers the images that you captured from the hospital, where it's virtually become a front line itself.
Yeah, so NASA's it's in the red zone, so it's surrounded by the Israeli military. Most of the time, they were probably a kilometre or a little bit more away. But for 3 days, about 2 or 3 weeks ago, they came within a few hundred metres of the hospital, and it was extremely tense. We were hearing the bombings, the machine gun fire, non-stop all night. Many staff left because they found it too dangerous to stay there. Patients were discharged. One patient I'd done major abdominal surgery on 12 hours previously. He left the hospital after 12 hours, and I tried to persuade him to stay, but he said, "It is safer for me in my tent in Al-Mawasi," and we know that's not a safe area. He said, "It's safer for me there than it is in this hospital."
And your colleagues, we're hearing, a lot of the staff who are working there are suffering from starvation themselves, that many of them are queuing up for the kind of food that they are treating patients for.
Absolutely. I've been to Gaza many times, so I saw some people I'd known for years, some of them. I didn't recognize some of them. 2 colleagues of mine had lost 20 and 30 kilograms respectively. They were shells of what they'd been like before. They are all hungry, and they're coming into work every day, but they're then going home to their tents where they have no food. They are going. One anaesthetist I know, in between operations, was going to the food distribution points to get food for his family, and witnessing the horrors there, witnessing the young teenage males being shot by the Israeli soldiers, and seeing how chaotic that food distribution system is.
Well, it's been described by the UN and others as a death trap. Those who have been there have described the situation there where, the soldiers are opening fire on the civilians queuing up.
And I operate on many of those children. I saw young teenage boys, sometimes as young as 11, 12, 13, who had been shot at these food distribution points. They had gone there to get food for their starving families, and they were being shot. And I operate on many of them. One 12-year-old boy died on the operating table when we were operating because his injuries were so severe. And what was even more distressing was the pattern of injuries that we saw, the clustering of injuries to particular body parts on certain days. So one day they'd be coming in predominantly with gunshot wounds to the head or the neck, another day to the chest, another day to the abdomen. And I operated one day on half a dozen young boys, all of whom had severe abdominal injuries. One day, 12 days ago, 4 young teenage boys came in, all of whom had been shot in the testicles, and deliberately so. And this is not coincidental. The clustering was far, far too obvious to be coincidental. And it seemed to us like this was almost like a game of target practice. We're going to shoot the head today, tomorrow it'll be the chest, the next day it'll be the testicles. I would never have believed this possible unless I'd witnessed this with my own eye.
There you heard it yourselves, folks. That's eyewitness testimony by British surgeon Dr. Nick Maynard, suggesting very, very candidly that he witnessed children who had suffered from a pattern of wounds. One day, all of them being shot in one body area, the head; another day in another body area, the chest; another day, all of them in the testicles. Too much of a pattern, he alleges, for it to be a coincidence. So the idea that these negotiations have to stall because the world refuses to condemn Hamas and refuses to call terrorism by its name is an idea that is true, being used for an unjust purpose. It is a word of truth for an unjust purpose. Yes, Hamas is a terrorist organization. That's the truth. The unjust purpose is that same Hamas, the terrorist organization, was funded and facilitated by Netanyahu and his Likud Zionists to engage in that terrorism. And the very reason we find that terrorism repugnant, because it targets non-combatants, innocents and civilians and women, children and unarmed men, the very reason we find that repugnant is the very same reason that we would find it repugnant that the IDF would play target practice on Palestinian children. The BBC, in its own research, has corroborated the idea that children are being wounded in this way. Here is a BBC report.
The BBC World Service has compiled material on over 160 cases where children have been shot in Gaza and found that in 95 cases, the child was shot in the head or the chest. In most of these cases, the victim was under 12 years old. The cases we found run from the first weeks of the war up to July this year.
Now, one element is the war crimes clearly being conducted by Likudnik Zionists led by Netanyahu and, of course, by Hamas. We've got no problem condemning Hamas here, folks. Do you even know who we are? Just look up what we've been doing for the last 15 years. Look up the word Quilliam. Look up my name. Look up counter-extremism and understand our views on Hamas. Understand our views on the Iranian regime. But then, of course, understand our views on the sanctity of human life. If you're going to go around playing target practice with children, you've got no truck with us. As simple as that. Your game is over. And in that vein, the idea that you think you could get away with funding a terrorist group such as Hamas, facilitating October the 7th, and then using that as a pretext to invade Gaza and think that nobody else would notice, again, is no longer tenable. As Cradle reports right here, dated 31st of July, 2025, headlined, Israeli soldier reveals, quote, strange order to cancel Gaza border patrols on the 7th of October. Oh dear. We're going to read that for you. From the Cradle, an Israeli soldier stated that he and his fellow soldiers stationed at a military outpost on the Gaza border received orders not to carry out their usual early morning patrol on the border fence. On what date? On the 7th of October, 2023. This, by the way, is in a Jewish publication in case anyone doubts it. We're going to show you the video in a second. Stay with us. He's saying this in the Israeli parliament. And he's wounded, war wounded. This guy fought for your country. Carry on reading. That he said he received orders not to carry out their usual early morning patrol on the border fence on October the 7th, 2023, Israeli media reported on the 17th of July. During the time the border patrol would have normally been carried out, members of Hamas's armed wing, the Qassam brigades, Izzuddin Qassam, that's Kataib Izzuddin Qassam, crossed the fence to attack Israeli army bases and settlements, kibbutzim. Shalom Shitrit, that's the name of the eyewitness soldier who's testifying about the fact they were given a stand-down order on the night of October the 7th and told not to patrol the border. Shalom Shitrit, a soldier in the Golani Brigade, revealed the directive while giving testimony at a meeting of the lobby for reserve personnel in the Israeli Knesset, or the Israeli parliament. Quoting from Shitrit, we were playing on the phone at 5:20 a.m. and suddenly a strange message came from my battalion commander, the soldier explained. To continue the quote, and what he says on the call is something like this, quote, I don't know why, but an order was issued that there are no patrols at the fence until 9 in the morning. End of quote from the commander. Shitrit said soldiers from the outpost carried out patrols on the border fence every morning because you're in an operational battalion, and that's part of the matter. Hamas fighters attacked the Pega outpost and killed 14 Israeli soldiers there during Operation Al-Aqsa flood. When asked if this is why many soldiers at the outpost were still sleeping when the Hamas attack began, Shitrit stated, quote, I don't know how to answer it in that way. Our mortar department, there was an alert at dawn and we woke up. It's possible that in the patrol departments, they were told not to wake up. I don't know. I don't want to say just say that. But it gets worse. I'm going to carry on reading from the Cradle. The strange order to cancel routine patrols along the Gaza border adds to evidence that Israeli political and military leaders knew in advance about Hamas's plan to attack on October the 7th and allowed it to happen to justify the conquest and ethnic cleansing of Gaza and the building of Jewish settlements on top of the ruins of the Strip's soon-to-be-destroyed cities. Israeli military and intelligence officials ignored many signals on the night before the attack and in the previous weeks and months, indicating that Hamas was planning a large attack to take captives to exchange for Palestinian prisoners. Female Israeli soldiers tasked to observe activity on the Gaza border issued multiple warnings to their superiors that an attack was imminent, but they were ignored. To continue reading from the Cradle. After the attack began, the Israeli Air Force deployed Apache helicopters, tanks, and drones to bomb the kibbutz and the Gaza border nearby to prevent Hamas from taking captives with them back to Gaza. As a result, Israeli forces burned to death hundreds of Israeli civilians and Hamas fighters in an airstrike in Be'eri and other kibbutzim near the border, as well as at the Nova Music Festival, per a secretive policy known as the Hannibal Directive. The deaths were all quickly blamed on Hamas. Now, what's being alleged there by the Cradle from Jewish Israeli sources, such as the former soldier we're going to show you in a minute, what's being alleged there is that Netanyahu facilitated the October 7th attacks, told the Israeli Border Patrol, the IDF, at the Gaza border to stand down via a direct order. During that time, they were ordered to stand down. The attack happened. Once the attack happened, of course, the border soldiers awoke, responded in an attempt to defend themselves. Many lost their lives. Many hostages were taken. And then the Israeli army initiated the Hannibal Protocol, the Hannibal Directive, and just bombed everybody, killing everyone, burning all of those people that were caught by those bombings, and then blaming Hamas for burning people and babies alive. If you will remember that lie that was put out in the media. Now we're going to demonstrate that. So, because this is a lot to take in, but unfortunately for Netanyahu and his Likudnik Zionist cabal, it's now all out there in the Israeli parliament being testified to by the very soldiers who served that night. So here we're going to now show you Shalom Shitrit's testimony from the Israeli parliament, alleging specifically there was a stand-down order that allowed for the October the 7th attacks to happen. And we're going to share our screen and show you the video via our Twitter account because it's too long to upload, but you'll see it nevertheless via our shared stream. And here you go.
שלושתנו עושים לילה לבן. הרשינו לעצמנו בשבתות וחגים במיוחד לעשות לילה לבן עד לכוננות עם שחר, ואתם יודעים, יש לנו זמן לישון מחלקת מרגמות עד לכוננות הבאה. אז ב-5:20 בבוקר אנחנו יושבים ליד הקשר כדי לא להעיר מאזין, והסמג"ד שלי, ניר בוינפלג, שגם הוא נפצע קשה, וברוך השם הוא שרד, פתאום עולה בקשר בהודעה מוזרה. כל התחנות, לא יודע למה, לא יודע איך, משהו בסגנון הזה, אין סיור בגדר עד 9 בבוקר.
באיזה שעה זה?
5:20 בבוקר.
כל תחנות נשארים כאן משנה, אז מבחינת קרקע ואויב אין לנו דברים משמעותיים. מבחינת כוחותינו יצאה הנחיה מהחטיבה שעד השעה 9 בבוקר מול הערכת המצב, אף כלי לא מגיע לבורמה. ואני חוזר שוב, עד 9 בבוקר ואל מול הערכת המצב, אף כלי לא לבורמה. נמצאים בנקודות זינוק אחוריות, מהנחיית חטיבה, לא יודע בדיוק למה, לא שואל יותר מדי, זאת ההנחיה, זה מה שאנחנו עושים.
קצת לפני שהכל מתחיל. ואיתמר דופק לנו פרצוף כזה של מה? ואתה יודע, אנחנו חיילים פשוטים סך הכל, לוחמים, לא מפקדים ולא קצינים שנוכל לשאול שאלות, זו הוראה של הסמג"ד. מקבלים את הפקודה הזאת ולא שואלים שאלות, הורדת פקודה רגילה. ובאמת, אחרי שעה, 6:30, פתאום אזעקות.
תראי, אני אגיד לך את האמת, אני חייתי עם זה מה7 באוקטובר, ומאוד חששתי לדבר על זה, ושהגעתי לכנסת, זה היה אחרי תקופה ששאלתי כמה שצבא בכירים, מה בעצם קרה שם. והיו כאלה שבהתחלה אמרו לי, תשמע, היה איום צליפה של נ"טים על הגדר, לכן לא רצינו לשלוח חיילים, כדי שלא ייפגעו. ואז עם הזמן קצת נפל לי האסימון, ואמרתי, רגע, אם יש איום צליפה, איך יכול להיות שאני סך הכל 200 מטר מהגדר, לא יודע שיש איום, איך יכול להיות שחברים שלי נלחמים בלי וסט, עם תחתונים וגרביים, ואף אחד לא יודע שיש משהו, אנחנו סך הכל 200-300 מטר מהגדר. ואז זה עוד הפעם ישב לי בראש, ובאמת הזמינו אותי פתאום לכנסת. הרגשתי שזו ההזדמנות באמת לפתוח את הנושא הזה ולדבר עליו ולהבין בעצם מה קרה שם. והנה, את אומרת, כמו שאת אומרת, הרבה אנשים זה נשמע להם תמוה, ומה בעצם קרה שם. ואנחנו עוד פעם חוזרים לזה, ואני אגיד לך את האמת, איילה, אני חי עם איזשהו חור במוח מאז ה7 באוקטובר, שמשהו בלב מרגיש לי תשמעי, אני לא יודע מה היה שם, אני רוצה להבין מה קרה, כמו כולם.
תראה, הסמג"ד לא היה איום צליפה, כי הסמג"ד אומר אין לי מושג למה, ולא למה, ואיום צליפה יש הרבה פעמים. הוא אומר את זה בזמן אמת, ב-5:20 בבוקר, מישהו אמר לו להגיד ככה, הוא קיבל הוראה, בלי הסבר. וזה...
נכון, אז אנחנו בתור חיילים, שאנחנו שומעים את הדבר הזה, אז כמובן אנחנו ממלאים פקודות. זה כן נשמע לנו קצת מוזר, אבל חיילים בשטח, ואנחנו כבר בקו הזה כמעט חצי שנה, וקצת פה ושם הפסדים. את יודעת, מהפסד ל7 באוקטובר יש פה...
הפרות סדר. הפסדים.
כן, מהפרות סדר, אמת, נכון. מהפרות סדר למצב, לאירועים כמו של ה7 באוקטובר, אנחנו מדברים פה על, את יודעת, משהו שהוא הזוי, שהוא מאוד קיצוני, כדי לחשוב שיום אחד נגיע לדבר הזה.
דיברתם ביניכם מאז, אחרי שהתפרסמה ההקלטה שלו? דיברתם ביניכם, מי שנשאר?
אז כמובן שדיברנו על זה הרבה פעמים, וניסינו לבדוק את זה, ואמרתי לך מה אמרו לי כל מיני אנשי צבא. חשבתי הרבה פעמים לדבר על זה, לא לדבר על זה, ובאיזשהו שלב גם התחלתי לשאול את ההיגיון שלי. רגע, אם אומרים לי שיש איום צליפה, כמו שאת אומרת, איך יש איום? אם הוא אמר, אני לא יודע למה ואיך, וגם את יודעת, אמרתי, אולי אני לא זוכר טוב, אולי זה, ופתאום ההקלטה יצאה. את יודעת, יש לי פה אחריות, אני לא יכול לדבר על דבר כזה בטלוויזיה, ויש השלכות למה שאני אומר. אז פתאום הדבר הזה צץ, וההקלטה הזאת התפרסמה, וזה כמו פלשבק, החזיר אותי ממש לאותו יום. ומה אני אגיד לך, איילה? כמוני, כמוך, כמו כל עם ישראל, אני רוצה להבין מה קרה ב7 באוקטובר, איבדתי המון חברים, נפצעתי קשה, אני כל יום נפגש עם המשפחות, עם ההורים, ובאמת, את לא יודעת איזה כואב זה להכיל את זה וללוות אותם, ואנשים רואים אותי, שלום שטרית הפצוע, הם לא יודעים כמה דברים אתה מנסה לעשות, אני כל יום קם למלחמה, אני מנסה להמציא את עצמי מחדש, אני מנסה לעזור למשפחות האלה, כל יום זה מלחמה בפני עצמה, ואנחנו נלחמים, אנחנו לוחמים.
כמה נלחמה בלי הרגל, את מתכוון על זה, על לחיות חיים חדשים.
בדיוק, וגם להמציא את עצמך מחדש, להתקדם בחיים, לא לחיות את הדבר הזה. את יודעת, אנחנו בסוף זכיתי בחיים. אני צריך גם להתקדם בחיים, אני לא יכול להישאר תקוע באותו מקום, אין לי רגל, איזה מסכן. אני רוצה להבין מה קרה שם, ופתאום הדבר הזה שיצא, התציר הזה, זה מפחיד אותי מאוד. אני מקווה שיהיה לנו תשובות יותר ברורות בהמשך, ולא לקפוץ למסקנות, ולא להדאיג מדינה שלמה. אבל כן חשוב מאוד שיהיה פה תשובות חד משמעיות, ומי שצריך לשלם את הדין, שישלם את הדין. כל כך הרבה נרצחים. משהו שאני בתור חייל ששירת בגזרת עזה, אני אומר לך, על כל פיפס קטן קפצנו לגדר, על כל דבר קטן. זה מפחיד אותי לחשוב מה קרה שם.
And there you heard it yourself, folks. That's what, just to briefly describe again what you heard in that video. That's testimony by a Israeli soldier who served on the Gaza border on the very night of October the 7th, saying that they were given a stand-down order, told not to patrol the border on the night the attack happened, to stay away until 9 a.m. They then, in his Israeli parliament or Knesset testimony, played the audio recording of that stand down order in Hebrew that had subsequently been leaked. And then you saw him responding to us hearing that stand down order. And then that testimony in the Knesset was blended with an interview he later gave, speaking about his fears, about his suspicions that if they do indeed turn out to be true, that his superiors allowed for the attack to happen, how he feels about that, saying that it scares him what may have gone on that night. Tomorrow's Radical Dispatch will contain the raw video file that you just saw, with it all the subtitles translated. Apologies halfway through there if you couldn't see the subtitles. That will all be published tomorrow with the translation, with the subtitles, as will the link to the original Knesset testimony of that wounded soldier who served on the Gaza border on the night of October the 7th, Shalom Shitrit, as will the full link to his full media interview reacting to the tape of the stand down order, the recorded stand down order message being leaked and released. All of that will be published in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch. But suffice to say, the implications of what you just heard are that the leadership of the IDF were ordered to stand down and allow for Hamas to attack on that fateful night of October the 7th. Why, you may ask? Well, so as to create a pretext for Netanyahu to be able to say exactly as he's saying now, but Hamas, but Pakistan, he needs to invade Gaza and occupy it and retake that territory. That pretext, problem, reaction, solution is exactly how it subsequently transpired, but they couldn't remove the evidence, so they hid it. That's why the CCTV footage from October the 7th on the border outpost has gone missing. You really expect us to believe that the most secure border, the most secured border on the planet lost its CCTV footage after the worst attack in Israel's history, the worst terrorist attack in Israel's history? As we previously reported on Radical Media, and again, we'll republish it tomorrow, all the receipts of that CCTV footage going missing, it went missing in highly suspicious circumstances in the way that Epstein's death footage was edited with a minute missing. That's what happened, to conceal the truth of what really happened. And that's why the Cradle reporting on that news, headlined in the following way that we just read for you, says that Israeli soldier reveals strange order to cancel Gaza border patrols on October the 7th. And we'll read again for you now what we previously read prior to that video playing for you. The strange order to cancel routine patrols along the Gaza border adds to evidence that Israeli political and military leaders knew in advance about Hamas's plan to attack on the 7th of October and allowed it to happen to justify the conquest and ethnic cleansing of Gaza. That is now looking like the most probable scenario. And don't forget, there were many former Israeli military whistleblowers saying it at the time during the week of the attack itself. One of them, Radical Media interviewed, and that's Efrat Fenixon. Have a look at her reaction to this. This is Efrat's post. A very brave woman. I said on October the 7th, 2023, that based on my military experience, so pay attention, folks, all right? Starting again, Efrat Fenixon, Israeli former soldier. I said on October the 7th, 2023, that based on my military experience, I believe this was allowed to happen. I stand behind that. Today, a video of an Israeli soldier is circulating, which adds another proof of a stand-down order. I don't know why it popped up today. The soldier, Shalom Shitrit, who was badly injured on October the 7th, gave testimony first in the Parliament, Knesset, on July the 10th, 2024, and recently on July the 3rd, 2025. He was interviewed again after a recording of the stand-down order was released. We just played that recording for you and played Shalom Shotrit's testimony for you and his interview. It is not revealed yet, to continue reading from Efrat Fenixon, third paragraph down, it is not revealed yet, as far as I know, why this order was given or by whom, but the order was given at 5:20 a.m., clearly proving that the battalion commander is forbidding patrols to get close to the fence till 9 a.m. that day. Mind you, after his first testimony a year ago, he was also named and ridiculed, and his words were labeled conspiracy theory till the recording of the stand-down order was released. As, by the way, was Efrat Fenixon labeled and ridiculed, as were we when we said this on the 23rd of October. Efrat said it on the 7th, and here we are, fact-checking her words. Yes, she did. We at Radical Media cited Efrat Fenixon here, on the 15th of October, 2023, and there's the link to the citation of her on the 15th of October 2023. And she is a hero for speaking up so early. It cannot have been easy for her in Israel. Solidarity. We will publish all of those receipts in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch for you. But don't forget, this isn't just testimony by a former soldier. We showed you earlier that the joint heads of Israeli intelligence of Mossad, Shin Bet, the external and internal intelligence agencies, as well as their former head of the IDF, are all now turning on Netanyahu, demanding an end to the war and an immediate ceasefire, because this is, in their words, destroying Israeli freedom and security. Here it is again, in case you forgot. Reported by Haaretz in a joint appeal, former Mossad, Shin Bet, and IDF heads call for an immediate end to the Gaza war, warning it now serves, quote, messianic and extremist goals, end of quote, and is leading to the, quote, loss of Israel's security and its freedom. Israel's own security services know that this was an inside job. And if you want proof of that, just look at this Jerusalem Post headline. Netanyahu's funding for Hamas via Qatar enabled October the 7th invasion. And guess who's saying that? Not the Jerusalem Post who are reporting it, but yes, a former head of Israel's domestic intelligence services is saying it. This headline, read it again, dated on the 4th of March, 2025 this year, in the Jerusalem Post. Netanyahu's funding for Hamas via Qatar enabled October the 7th invasion, Shin Bet reveals. Shin Bet is Israel's internal security intelligence service. Subheading, the Shin Bet also revealed that SIM cards and sensors along the border were activated ahead of time, but were ignored. We're going to read a quote from that Jerusalem Post article now for you. 24th of March, 2025 this year, Jerusalem Post reports, while the Shin Bet Israeli security agency took a significant amount of responsibility for the disasters on October the 7th, in its report published unexpectedly on Tuesday, it also implicated Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu by implying that his policies regarding the Temple Mount, the treatment of Palestinian prisoners, and the judicial reform led to Hamas's decision to initiate its long-planned invasion. Other policies carried out under Netanyahu that the agency flagged as problematic and as contributions to Hamas's decision to invade were his facilitation of Qatari funding to Hamas and his opposition to proposed assassination operations of top Hamas leaders at the time, such as Yahya Sinwar. Didn't we say that? Here it is, that news again. By the way, we understand how incredulous this sounds. It's why we're giving you multiple sources, all of which we will republish in tomorrow's written version of the Radical Dispatch. If you're still in doubt, here is the Times of London saying exactly that. On your screens right now, from the Times of London, reported April 2025, headlined, Israeli spy chief to step down after rift with Netanyahu. Subheading, Ronen Bar and the Prime Minister are facing each other in court as they trade accusations of lying and blame for the October the 7th attacks. Oh dear. A quote from that Times article, 28th of April, 2025 this year. Israel's spy chief has announced his resignation over the failure of the security establishment to prevent the October the 7th massacre by Hamas. Oh, listen to that again. From the Times of London, 28th of April, 2025. Israel's spy chief has announced his resignation over the failure of the security establishment to prevent the October the 7th massacre by Hamas. Ronen Bar, the head of the Shin Bet, Israel's domestic intelligence service, said he would step down on the June the 15th, nearly 3 months after Benjamin Netanyahu tried to dismiss him, saying he no longer trusted him. The sacking was blocked by the Supreme Court after a petition by opposition parties who said it constituted a conflict of interest motivated by the agency's investigations into a corruption scandal involving Netanyahu's closest aides. If you're still in doubt, we're going to now show you video testimony of a former Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Barak. Yes, that same Ehud Barak who frequently visited Epstein in his Manhattan mansion. A former Israeli Prime Minister literally saying and blaming Netanyahu for funding and facilitating Hamas. And in addition, another former head of Israel's domestic spy agency, Shin Bet, saying the same as what we just showed you this recent former head of Shin Bet, Ronen Bar, said. So this is a different head of Shin Bet, all in the same video as the video of the former Israeli PM Ehud Barak, saying the same thing, that Netanyahu funded and facilitated Hamas and October the 7th. Have a look at this.
So are you saying Benjamin Netanyahu deliberately boosted Hamas to try to prevent a Palestinian state?
Yeah, sure. He deliberately and systematically even told, on record, whoever wants to avoid the threat of a two-state solution has to support my policy of paying protection money to the Hamas.
So what we did, with the permission of our Prime Minister, is to let Qatar to transfer a huge amount of money in cash, probably more than $1.4 billion. By doing it, we increased the power of Hamas. We did everything in order to make sure that Hamas will go on controlling Gaza, and Palestinian Authority will control the West Bank, so they will fight each other.
Netanyahu maintains the Qatar money was to avoid a humanitarian catastrophe. Having helped to build up Hamas, Netanyahu has now vowed to destroy it.
He fed the beast and it exploded in our face. If you base your national security strategy solely on force, then you need to win 24/7 forever.
The only thing we'd add is that the beast did not explode in Netanyahu's face. Netanyahu knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted Hamas to do what they did, hence the stand-down order, hence the missing CCTV footage. Why? So that he could destroy the chances of peace. Why? Because Saudi Arabia were just about to sign the Abraham Accords prior to October the 7th. That would mean Saudi recognition for Israel and normalization between Saudi Arabia and Israel in return for a Palestinian state. That was the regional framework that was being negotiated under the name the Abraham Accords. Netanyahu, as well as Iran, who hates Saudi Arabia, didn't want that to happen. Again, how curious that those two enemies agreed on that point, that they didn't want the Abraham Accords to proceed. Iran wanted Hamas to continue attacking Israel. Netanyahu, as we've just demonstrated with multiple receipts, wanted Hamas to continue attacking Israel so that he would have the pretext to invade Gaza. And for Iran, their interest was to continue their war. Saudi Arabia duly pulled out of the Abraham Accords after the October the 7th attacks happened because it was too politically costly to be associated with peace with Israel after Israel reinvaded Gaza and started bombing and killing and snipering children for target practice while holding 300 child hostages in their jails. It's not easy to make peace with a country that does that for Arab public opinion. These are the facts of the matter. No matter how much Likudnik Zionists and Netanyahu want to tell you to focus only on Hamas by blaming Hamas for 100% of this problem and responding to anything you say by saying, but Hamas, but Batistan Hamas, it doesn't work anymore. Nobody believes them. And as we've demonstrated earlier, Trump's warning to his Israeli donors that even MAGA have stopped believing them. In fact, as you see again on your screens, reported by the Times of Israel, Trump said to warn Jewish donors that MAGA world is starting to hate Israel because everybody can now see through Netanyahu's plan. What are we saying, therefore, should be the solution? Well, before we get to that, we're just going to show you again a video of ours from Radical Media saying exactly this. The Netanyahu facilitated the October the 7th attacks, and time is vindicating. But you can see there at the bottom of this image, we'd already published all of this for you in the Radical Dispatch as far back as the 15th of October, 2023, only a few days after the October the 7th attacks. That same few weeks after the attacks, we published, next week, in fact, after the attacks, we published that headline that's at the bottom of the screen for you. Netanyahu funded and supported Hamas for war. Receipts. You can see it being compared with the later 2025 headline from March by the Jerusalem Post above it. It's almost identical. The Jerusalem Post says Netanyahu's funding for Hamas via Qatar enabled October the 7th invasion, Shin Bet reveals. And ours from 2 years prior in the Radical Dispatch, Netanyahu funded and supported Hamas for war. The shadow knows. Now, again, moving to solutions, one thing that we've repeated throughout this stream is that what the October 7th attacks and those who supported those attacks, Iran, Hamas, Islamic Jihad, Netanyahu, and the Likudnik Zionist extremists, those who supported the October the 7th terrorist attacks and funded them and allowed them to happen and told their own soldiers to stand down so they could happen, those guilty war criminal terrorists who supported the October the 7th attacks did so because they wanted to scupper the chances of peace in the regional context being arrived at through the Abraham Accords framework, normalization with Israel in return for a Palestinian state. Why did they want to scupper that? Because they didn't believe in a Palestinian state. They no longer subscribe to a Palestinian state because that extremist Likudnik Zionist faction believe in a greater Israel, just like Hamas believes in annihilating Israel and creating their own theocracy, like Iran. Hamas's backer has an Islamist theocracy. So they did so to scupper the peace. Understanding that means understanding why Starmer, back to the beginning of this stream, Starmer's threats of unilateral recognition for a Palestinian state, as sympathetic as we are to the notion, will not succeed, will remain as gesture politics, unless we all, as an international community, return to the framework for peace, which is, again, back to that phrase we've used repeatedly on Radical Media, a grand regional settlement for peace. Unless we all return to that grand regional settlement for peace framework involving the region via the Abraham Accords, we will not get a negotiated peace. We have to resurrect the Abraham Accords, and it's why our response to George Galloway in this regard is so important. For some strange, unknown reason, Galloway, the founder of the Workers' Party, veteran anti-war UK politician, kind of like him, but he's completely wrong here, and we're not afraid of saying it. Galloway decides, for some unexplained reason, to spasm against the Abraham Accords online without explanation. Here he is on your screens. Here is his quote. You can see at the bottom of the screen there a tweet by George Galloway. Abraham Accords folks are not welcome in the Workers' Party Great Britain. That's Galloway's party. And our response above him, very direct and candid. Wrong call. I voted for your party over Gaza in a safe Labour seat. This policy is ignorant. The Abraham Accords are a regional framework for peace, normalization with Israel, that is, in return for a Palestinian state. Support the Accords. Suggest a better alternative other than more war, which is cheered on only by fanatics who are in too deep or those without skin in the game, or forever hold your peace. We are coming. And we're making it very clear there that the solution remains and can only be a regional solution in the context of the Abraham Accords framework. There is no other practical solution on the table. Those who oppose the Abraham Accords regional solution are unavoidably, only therefore by implication, either calling for more war or are seeking simply to scupper the peace for other reasons, perhaps personal gain. But ultimately, they're calling for more war. Anyone that tries to convince you that one state solution is the way forward is calling for more war. Netanyahu and the Israeli state will not accept a one-state solution without war. Think about it. One state means not only the 20% Arab Israelis inside Israel who are already Israeli citizens, but all the Palestinians in the West Bank and Gaza and the refugees who are currently stateless in camps, all of them immediately get equal citizenship in an Israeli state. The Likudnik Zionist cabal know that would be the end of their ideal of a greater Israel run by Jewish supremacists. And they, because they believe this is existential, will fight to the death to make sure you don't get a one-state solution. Any naysayers to the Abraham Accords and the regional framework for a two-state solution, normalization with Israel in return for a Palestinian state, any naysayers against that idea, including George Galloway, the onus is on them to present a practical roadmap for how one state can be achieved without more war. Ultimately, if you support more war right now, you're crazy, frankly. And as we've stated in our response there, and that's either because you're a fanatic who simply cannot countenance peace with Israelis, perhaps because they're Jewish and you've also veered towards anti-Semitism, who knows, but either because you're a fanatic or because you have no skin in the game whatsoever and the whole thing is just a video game for you. Anyone who's actually involved in this subject will understand that war leads to nothing but disaster, and pontificating over the future of suffering and starving Palestinians by extending that war because of some ideological objection they may have to Israel and therefore them standing in the way of peace, clearly that all of that is not in the interests of those suffering and starving Palestinians. The Abraham Accords remain the only practical way to end this war and permanently move, for once and for all, beyond it in our lifetimes. And the regional powers have realized that too. Hence this headline we're showing on your screens now, reported by the Times of Israel. Qatar, Saudi Arabia, Egypt signed declaration calling for Hamas to disarm, to leave Gaza at the UN two-state confab. That's basically saying in the Times of Israel that the Qatar, Egypt, Saudi Arabia have all agreed that Gaza's future cannot be a future controlled by Hamas. The regional framework for peace through the Abraham Accords would entail Saudi Arabian recognition for Israel, normalization with Israel, in return for a Palestinian state. That part, in return for a Palestinian state, Mr. Netanyahu, is non-negotiable. The part that you want normalization with Israel, there will be a Palestinian state. That part is non-negotiable. However, it is conceded that the Palestinian state element of that must occur within a regional negotiated settlement context. So these unilateral declarations by Starmer, Canada, France, others, Spain, Norway, Ireland, it is conceded that they don't necessarily help in arriving at that solution, as sympathetic as we are to them, and as desperate clearly as those making those unilateral demands appear to be, because as exasperated as they are at the chances of peace. We do concede that it's better to remain within the regional framework context to get that Palestinian state rather than unilateral declarations. But the issue of the state being on the table in itself is non-negotiable. If you want normalization with Israel for Saudi Arabia and other Arab Muslim powers in the region, it goes without saying that that can only be in return for a Palestinian state. That is the grand regional settlement. Netanyahu has no cards left to play. His own intelligence chiefs from the Mossad, Shin Bet, and the IDF have all turned on him. His own soldiers are now testifying in his own parliament that he facilitated the Hamas attacks. He cannot blame the boogie anymore, as Michael Jackson would love to say. It's all out in the open. He overplayed his hand. He's been exposed with his pants down. And there will be peace in the Middle East in a post-Hamas and a post-Netanyahu future. And it will be through the Abraham Accords framework. Watch this space, because we here at Radical Media will have some major announcements in that regard about the Abraham Accords and our work on them coming very soon. That's all we've got time for today's Warrior Creed live stream. Thank you for your time and your patience today. We've gone over to an hour, 20 minutes, but it was a very important topic to cover. As we say, all the receipts for today's stream, with all the videos, all the eyewitness testimonies, all the Shin Bet, IDF, and Mossad allegations against Netanyahu facilitating the October the 7th attacks and allowing them to happen, all of those receipts with links so you can do your own research will be published in tomorrow's Radical Dispatch. You can find that via Radical Media on majidnawaz.substack.com. And we ask all of our subscribers to become premium members of Radical Media, because without your subscription, we cannot continue this investigative work. And of course, it gains you access to all of the paywalled content, including the full audio-visual podcast version of this stream, as well as paywalled Radical Dispatches and exclusive premium long-form Radical podcasts, the last of which was with the 22-year-old Ghazan poet, Muhammad Al-Qudwa, again, for premium members only. Until next time, thank you for your time. You've been listening to The Radical, Majid Nawaz, for this, the Warrior Creed live stream.
You are now about to witness the strength of street knowledge. Witness the strength of street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Terrorize the jam like troops in Pakistan.
Street knowledge. Street knowledge.
Quick service announcement brought to you in part by Warriors.